Hey, today we're going to try to do a leak down test, and the idea here is to kind of give your engine a health check. It's kind of like going to the doctor and making sure that everything is good. And what the objective here is to see that the engine is actually sealing in the cylinder and with the piston, and you're able to get the proper amount of compression to generate power. So on the a lot of people think you could do a compression test, but on the Briggs LO206 engine, there's actually a compression release. So if you hook the compression tester up to this, you're really not going to be able to do an accurate test. So the common way to do this is actually to do a leak down test. And what we're trying to see here is that we don't want to have anything more than 5% loss. And in fact, I'm going to do this on a cold engine. Typically you would do this on a warm engine, which would need, everything is expanded and will tighten up when you with a warm engine. But you'll see that I'm pretty on this engine, I'm below the 5% threshold. If you're above 10%, you're probably losing some power. If you're all the way up to 20%, you probably have a fairly worn engine, and you're going to have to definitely get some things done, or you're going to be running last a lot. So the thing that will probably happen to your engine is you're either going to have worn piston rings, or your valves are going to wear down. And more likely it's going to be your valves. They're the thing that's moving a lot. But the piston rings on the LO206 seem to be very robust. They seem to last a long time. They're not like piston rings on a typical 2-cycle that's running at 14,000 RPMs. You're only running at 6,000 RPMs. So they don't tend to wear out nearly as quickly as you would on another engine. So again, this engine's actually cold, so we're going to do it on this, but typically I was outside, I'd warm the engine up first and then go from there. So to do the test, you're going to really need essentially 3 things. You're going to need a leak down tester. And the leak tester I have here is a pretty good quality one. You can actually go to Harbor Freight. They have these things for 40 bucks. You could also, sometimes they have them on sale, they're like 29 or 30 bucks. So they're not that expensive. The one I have here is actually pretty good. The Harbor Freight one, I've seen mixed reviews. Some people all say, wow, it's great, it works. Others, I've seen a few other people say it's not necessarily good. So I kind of shied away from it a little bit and actually spent $70 at Amazon on this OTC, which is a pretty quality unit, and I think it's definitely is good enough to do what we need to do here. Now the other thing you're obviously going to need is an air compressor, and so you're going to need the air compressor, and I'll just go ahead and attach to the leak down tester. And then the third thing, you're going to want to set that to, typically most people have about 100 pounds. We'll probably use maybe 70, 80 pounds when we do the test. And then the third thing you're going to need is a way to lock down the crankshaft. And the issue here is that once we get the top dead center, once you put the air compressor on, it'll push it off top dead center. The exhaust valve will open up, and you'll think that you have a really bad engine, but you don't really. It's just that your crank is actually moving. So we're going to put this on after we get it to top dead center, and this is going to lock it down and keep it in place. Okay, so the first thing what we want to do here is we want to get the engine to top dead center. So I'm going to come around here and get to the actual cord here so I can move the engine. And why don't you bring the camera around so that you can see the actual the valves as we go through this. Now, when you pull the valves, what you'll notice first, when I'll go through this, is we're going to see the exhaust valve eventually open. And so after the engine's fired, you're going to have the exhaust valve open up, let the gases out. And then you're going to go through and you're going to see now that the intake valve over here is going to open up and then open. Now that essentially let the fuel and air mixture into the engine. So now at this point, we're ready to start to go into the compression stroke. And so I'm going to put this in here to find when we reach top dead center. So we're going to go up, and we're going to keep going up. And I think it's kind of hard but tricky. You can kind of feel it. I think we've got it all the way to the top at that point. So now you're at top dead center. You'll notice that both of these are about equal, and they should both be closed at this point at top dead center. So let me come back around the other side of the engine over the leak down tester, and we'll hook that up. So now at this point, oh, we've got to do a couple more things here. One thing you want to do is you want to open up your crankcase. So I think we want to take this up and open. So if there's air leaking past your piston rings, it's going to get blown out of the crankcase. So having that open, you'll be able to hear that a lot easier. And then at this point, we've got it at top dead center. So we want to install our lockdown on the crank here. So you want to put this, this comes in, it fits really nice right on the LO206. We screw it in and we lock her down. That don't have to be too tight. Now, when you put this in, you can lock this down, and you can tighten it down by hand, but the issue is, you know, if you're only able to put 20 or 30 pounds into this and you put more than 20 or 30 pounds of air pressure in it, it's going to move. So what I do is I take this and I'm going to have to tighten this up more to make sure it's pretty tight on the actual crank and it's not going to move once I actually start doing this. So that should be pretty tight. And at this point now we want to hook up the leak down tester. So you want to take that, and hopefully we can screw it in there on the first try. Wow, I did. And we got that going in there. And you can just kind of hand tighten that in, get it tight. And then from there, now we want to close this all the way. So you turn it all the way to the right. Oops, wrong way, all the way to the left. We want to close the compression tester up and set it back to 0. Okay, so now we're at 0. No air will go through it. And we can hook that up. Okay, and then at that point, now we can start letting some air into it and we'll get our reading. So we want to turn it to the right. You can see the pressure's coming up. And you can see we're not seeing a whole lot of loss here. And I'm going to take it all the way up to 80 pounds. So the one on the left is your in. You can see that I've got 80 and 79. So I'm really only losing maybe 1 or 2%. And this engine is actually cold. So if it was warm, this engine would you'd hardly see any loss at all. Now I don't know if we can hear this, but you will hear a little bit of air coming out of the top of the exhaust. And that's really most of the loss we're probably seeing is because the exhaust valve is not closed. Now if I hold this closed, you're getting a little bit past the rings as well coming out of the crank. And you're really never going to, with a cold engine, you're definitely not going to see an complete air tightness. So that's it. We've got the compression test done, and that's really giving you the reading off of this thing. And so if you do have an engine that's got significant leak down, then you probably have a couple different problems. It really is going to come down to either your piston rings are not sealing up any longer, and that's probably an old engine you've run for maybe a few years by the time that typically happens. So at that point, that's one problem. The other problem is your valves are probably leaking, either your exhaust valve or your intake valve. And you can see I have the carb off it here. You can actually feel a little bit of air coming out of there as well. But so at this point, if that is the case, what you can do to fix that is you can actually take the valves out, and you could go and lap the valves, essentially reconditioning them so they are able to make a tight seal. And that's pretty inexpensive. All you really need is some lapping compound to lap the valves. Now, another problem with that is that a lot of times the valves not only will need to be lapped, but they may need to be cut a little bit to make sure that they're able to seal correctly. So, in my case, for the do-it-yourselfer, you may want to just buy a couple new springs, which those are like $5 a piece, and then replace the valves. The valves are maybe $15–20 each. So you're into it, you know, $50 at the most. You're able to take care of your top end of your engine just by replacing those two things. Now, if your bottom end is having a problem, your rings are not sealed, then you've got a more serious problem, because the engine is sealed. Now, in the old day, with other engines, you could, you know, open it up and put a new piston in and then rehome the cylinder. But in this case, since it's all sealed and you've got a seal on the engine, what you can do is you can buy a short block. And really, the short block is actually going to cost you less than having all that work done. You can buy a short block fairly inexpensively. So here at 206 Outsider, part of putting these videos together is to promote kind of the do-it-yourselfer and enabling you to do these things yourself. If you don't feel comfortable with it, we can, at 206 Outsider, we can help you with these. We can do the leak down test for you at a nominal fee, or if you need to replace either your top end or your bottom end, we could do that for you as well. So that's pretty much it. Hopefully you can, you want to do this probably a couple times a year just to make sure you've got your engine running. Certainly in the winter is a great time to do it, so you're all ready in the spring to go out and race. And the idea is to have a great engine when you go out there and run. So thank you very much, and that's all I got.